like for us to talk about today was the when it's appropriate to have a fiscal agent who can provide sort of the paperwork and the audit processes that smaller nonprofits may not be able to do. Talk about the timeline and talk about the communication plan, and then if we have time to try to do a little bit of thinking about how any of this might apply to the Nashville Needs Fund, because that's going to be the first time the council has had an undesignated pot of money.
I mean, I think that's a good heads up on something that's going to be maybe different than what we talk about now.
Yeah. It'll be new, and if there is no process in place, it will be a free-for-all. So I think if we can get in front of that and create a process either that mirrors this or aligns with it or adjust accordingly, then we will have done everyone a favor. So that's our goal. So we were talking about fiscal agent, just in terms of, Mary Jo, if you want to jump back in on what we've done in the past, or how maybe larger umbrella organizations could do that for smaller organizations, or...
Yes, sometimes it has been a timing issue where a smaller nonprofit doesn't have an audit and they're required to have an audit and the work needs to be done. And it works best when they actually already have a relationship with another nonprofit. We have had instances where CFMT or United Way have been the fiscal agent, but we've also had circumstances where maybe a related partner nonprofit becomes the fiscal agent, or if two organizations are doing the work together. This was not a situation where Tennessee Justice for Neighbors needed a fiscal agent, but it was a situation where they were doing the work together. So Turk was the recipient of the funds and subcontracted with Tennessee Justice for Neighbors. So it was not a situation at all where there was a need on TJFON's side, but it was just a really nice alignment. So you might get that where there's two nonprofits that are working together, where one can be the primary. They accept all of the funds and they actually subcontract with that second nonprofit. That's one way where, in the situation where a nonprofit needed a fiscal agent, that's another way to do it. When they're working in partnership, which is also usually provides a lot of nice collaboration.
And one serves as the primary. Great. All right, I want to welcome Councilmember Brinsley Webb. Thank you for being here. I'm going to add you to my attendees, and we've got some guests. We're glad you're here.
Here, I'm going to go to the side then.
Side to side. If y'all don't mind telling me who you are, I would love to hear you in as visitors. So who we got?
I'm Dr. Fonda Harris, and I'm with Metro Public Health Department.
Okay, great. I'm glad you're here. Fonda?
Fonda. As in Jane.
Jane. All right. Okay. Fonda Harris. Metro Health.
Yes.
Great. Glad you're here. That's good. And
I'm Dr. Ann Melville Chester, Division Director, Behavioral Wellness, Metro Public Health.
great. Okay. And
Diane Harden. I'm the budget manager at the health department.
okay. We're glad the health department is here. Harden?
DEN.
Okay. I may have to come back later. Great. Thank y'all for being here, because y'all are certainly one of the departments that does a lot of this, and that sometimes we throw things at y'all, and we're sort of learning that may not always be the entire part of the process. So we're trying to fill in those gaps before the next budget comes up. So thank y'all for being here. So anything else about fiscal agent? Does any of that need to become officially written down somewhere where it's not already covered, I guess is. I mean, we heard at the last meeting just some frustration from smaller nonprofits that they weren't sure if they were going to be able to access stuff because they didn't know if it was available. So again, is that a fiscal agent issue, or is it a communication issue? The pieces are already in place to make that happen.
I think the pieces are in place.
Okay.
You know, I spent 17 years as a CFO of a nonprofit and worked with a lot of small ones. It is up to the nonprofits to have their ducks in a row, know who they can partner with, know what their capacity is before applying.
Gotcha.
So, I mean, we haven't ever turned anybody down. We have gone out of our way to find fiscal agents for people.
Gotcha.
That slows the process, but I do believe we haven't made it hard for somebody
Okay.
if they were prepared.
That sounds fair. We may circle back around to that when we talk about communication, just to make sure that.
I think communication
People who
is
don't know what they
probably
don't
at the
know.
end of all of this going to be the biggest piece.
Yeah, so we'll just throw everything into that as we do that. So the next thing on my list, and if y'all are welcome to jump in and say, oh no, we really need to think about this before we even talk about the timeline. But what we see is there's sort of an ongoing grant-making process within a lot of departments. I mean, as we know during our budget process, we often hear about things that the department does on a regular basis, but they don't show up in the budget because they're based on a grant. And the budget can't include things that they don't, have a written guarantee that they've got yet. So we know those come in, and that whole process seems to run on it looks to us like it runs on its own. So if anything, all I think we want to try to do is to ensure that as we try to put together a better council-facing piece of this process, that it dovetails with that, or at least isn't counter to it or so dramatically different that it causes confusion, because there's enough confusion as it is. So if we back up from, it would be ideal by the time we get to the budget public hearing and wish list process, that any worthy organization that thinks they're doing stuff has known ahead of time that they should be talking with a specific department. And Mary Jo, again, I keep staring at you, but you got the answers to all my questions. So,
We have a place on the hub for a nonprofit to apply, and they have to select the department that they're working for. And I think that's probably one of the first, I'll call, obstacles
Yeah.
for those nonprofits, is they don't know. They don't know who to work with.
Right.
So I think that's where, as a council member, if you're hearing from somebody that says, hey, how do I get in the budget?
Right.
We really need Metro's funding. I always say the first thing to remind them is, we are not a funder. We will work in partnership for services that can be provided, by a nonprofit in a either more efficient or more effective manner than Metro can provide it itself.
Right.
But if it's simply, you're doing great work, that doesn't mean that we're a funder. If that sounds like something, they're starting to tell you, then as a council member, help them find the right department. You may not know. You can call finance, you can call around the departments. We will find them the right place. And then that becomes the relationship to make sure that this department can work in collaboration, or, as almost like a vendor. If you think about it, it's kind of more of a fee for service than a grant. They're going to be grant contracts, but think
Yeah.
about it. They're really providing a service that we think, you all think, the mayor's office thinks needs to be provided to our county, and these nonprofits can do it better. So then, that's where they really need to work in tandem. That's where then the department is more the subject matter expert. I'll give a little of an example of how it just would work better with the department. Last year, in the substitute budget, $200,000 was provided for a child care study for United Way, and it was just in the admin budget. And so there was really no owner. Those funds are still not under contract. It's November, because they didn't have an owner. It was a great idea, it got thrown in the budget. MAC, Metro Action Commission, they are our child care experts. They have the Head Start programs, they know about child care. They are going to work with United Way on this as a subject matter expert to oversee and manage the contract. That's what we want. We want subject matter experts who can develop the scope of work, make sure that we're doing it right. They're going to know better about budgets and things that they need to review. And as questions come up, the nonprofit may say, hey, we intended to do this, but we're kind of running into this. Can we do this instead? Again, you want somebody who They know that layout, they're familiar with that work. So it's just slowed it down because we actually have to bring it back to council to transfer the funds from admin to MAC.
Really?
Okay, because we talked about that. I wonder why, okay.
And then it also, and at the same time, we'll approve the contract. So that's just an example of where if that had been done in, collaboration, even at the time of the substitute budget, and they had been named, like that's the other thing, as a council member, if you know that that's the organization who's gonna get the money, they need to be named. United Way was not named. That's the other reason the contract has to come back to council.
Oh, right.
So there's just ways that this could have already been contracted and done probably in August or September. But it's November, and I don't think that's on the agenda I don't think it was filed for the 19th. So it'll be somewhere in December.
Gotcha.
So those, so now you've shortened the window of that contract.
Does, who handles the triage of these requests coming in? Does that go into finance?
No, so then it would go to the department.
Well, no, I'm saying like when I go to the form, so I got it up right now, right? Let's, yeah, like, well, so like,
Somebody
let's,
has
As far
to be
as
looking
creating
for
it,
not really who's creating it, like when it comes in, who sees it and says, yeah, that makes sense, that needs to go
Well,
to education?
it would
or-
either go directly to the department or it would go to the hub, somebody from Aaron Williams' teams,
Yeah,
and then it would go to the department.
okay.
But
So-
that team is not qualified to say, oh, this looks
No,
like such and such.
And they wouldn't be, they would
shouldn't
literally
be.
just be directing it. But this is where I think the relationship, I can understand, where a department would say, I don't know what this is, I'm busy. They may not get back to that nonprofit. So that goes back to kind of that connection ahead of time, that a blind cold call, a blind email of, hey, I want to partner with you on these services, could get lost. That's why I say communication. That's probably establishing a meeting ahead of time, because I'm not going to say that that's,
If they don't put it in the
The
department,
bets.
we'll let you go to the next one, so you have to put it in the department.
You gotta put it in a department, but my fear is, and I'll just throw out a use case, so we got the health here. Let's say I have a nonprofit, and my nonprofit handles handing out educational materials about women's health. And I go through this selector here, and I click on education, because I think, oh, it's definitely education,
Yeah.
right? Simple mistake. Is that gonna go to somewhere over at MNPS, and then it's never gonna get monitored or kicked back, or that's,
There's nobody watching.
yeah.
Well, really, there's only 8 departments listed. Go back to that list.
Yeah,
Like the
it's-
health department's not even really even listed on there.
It's not.
It's very
that's-
generic titles.
Yeah, it is.
Maybe that's part of the,
I'm somewhat thinking like, that's what we should start with, because that's
Yeah.
probably what needs to be improved.
Yeah.
Like, the process probably needs to start around
the
what's
titles.
there,
Yeah.
and, who gets pinged, what's the monitoring of it. But even then, I think there's a lot of improvement that could be made there. Even then, it's still kind of a cold
Yeah,
request.
sure, yeah,
And it needs a warm introduction of some
Yeah.
sort, and that's really gonna be people.
yeah.
People. There's somebody in each department that's gonna have to be accountable to answering this.
I think.
Accountable, but I also think that I think it's a step before that. I think it is a phone call from a nonprofit to a department to figure out who is the right person to talk to and present their idea before they're doing a cold.
Okay, I'm just, okay, so have you ever tried to call Metro Department sometimes and get to somebody to the right
Well, I
time?
know.
Yeah, okay, so,
And that-
I mean, I hate to say it, but,
I get a
I
lot
just
of
tried that
those.
recently, and I was like ready to slam the phone down and,
Well, I know, I'm usually the one redirecting
Yeah,
folks.
so.
My name's on the finance page, and I get all
So,
the
okay,
stray
so
calls.
what about after we make these titles, then we put a list with the titles with who they should contact for a one-on-one? Because right now, I mean, how do you know unless it's assigned to somebody and they know that's their responsibility? I mean, you've gotta have somebody that it's assigned to. I think.
Well, and I think that's one of the questions is as council members again, the thing that we're trying to be thoughtful about is either in the budget wish list process to ensure that we just don't blindly without,
What was that? I'm sorry.
So that's the first choice. That does have a fuller list, but it's confusing because
That
then
is
you're.
confusing, because you went down here and we thought
Yeah.
that was where now,
It's two questions. One is select the department that provides which services are provided by your organization, and then 4 questions down it says select the priority area that best aligns, and it's like a smaller list.
it's the same thing. That needs to be
Well, because that would
deleted.
be like a mayoral priority,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
this was put
there's
together
a lot
out
of
the
good
mayor's
work being
office.
done, but it doesn't mean that it's work that we have,
Yeah.
taxpayer dollars to fund.
To fit.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah. No, I get it.
Which is important. And, and again, I think we can't emphasize enough, as Mary Jo has said, we're not in the business of funding all nonprofits.
No.
But our departments have missions to do, and if there's a nonprofit out there that can help them accomplish it better than they can, then we want
Right.
to make the process of getting those two together work better than we sometimes see it.
Yeah,
working.
we just need to understand the process and the problem that's being presented.
Yeah.
And I do think it all changes once we have the, is it Nashville, what's the
National needs.
needs? I almost
Yeah.
said Nashville next. The Nashville Needs Fund.
So
That
that
kind
may
of
be.
changes the whole conversation.
That's a really good
Because
point.
that actually does create a pool of funds that are
will need
intended
to
to
be
go to
expended.
nonprofits.
Yeah. On an
I think
annual
that changes everything.
Does, do we keep those two processes separate, or do we learn from this one and say, and we've got this, maybe Nashville Needs becomes one of those, but again, even if there is funding from Nashville Needs, we still need a department to own it.
Well, I
it's gonna
think
be
you
a
need a
mess,
whole
right?
different, I think it needs a whole nother process. That actually becomes an open grant application. We do
Similar to
not
the CARES
have
Act,
an
yeah.
open grant application. I think that's probably maybe the most misunderstood or the complex thing about what we're talking about
Okay.
is we're trying to find ways for people to apply for grants. We do not have an open grant application. We don't have a grant fund. We don't have grant pooling. We have taxpayer dollars that are available in the budget
Right.
for all services.
So then-
But we will, at one point,
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
a pool of nonprofit funds. And
Funds.
that becomes then you need somebody who, I think then there really is somebody who then is receiving applications, is setting up things into priority buckets. I don't know if those priorities are set by council. I'd have to go back actually to the National
I think
Needs
the
Fund.
council had.
I think so. So I've got to refresh, my memory of that process or of those funds. But you might end up having a staff person that's in charge of that. You might have, that's a whole new ball of wax,
Interesting.
I think. Different than anything that I've seen. Not that I'm
Would
been
it
here
be
forever.
similar to the CARES Act process, or could it be, or?
It absolutely could be. I mean, I think, I have to go back to the legislation. I don't think there's a whole lot of parameters around it. So part of me wants to say I think it could be whatever the council decides it wants it to be. I have to look again, is it $1 million a year? So,
Plus, I think there ended up being a percentage of some of the
Yeah, there was
some
an
of the
amendment
ticket
that I
taxes that
think-
got added to it, so it'll be over $1 million a year.
right. So,
But it will still,
but you still have to decide, are there parameters? Are there maximums? Are there priority areas that are gonna change each year? In my mind, that becomes a lot more like the community partnership funds. So right now, the community partnership funds are $200,000.
just because that's what
Spread.
this mayor has continued from other years, right?
Right, this was,
It had to be.
these
It's not
started,
defined
no, but what happens now are there are 3 departments that have $200,000, and those departments have set their process for an open grant application, and they set their priorities each
Okay.
year. They have staff who review all of those, they go through, a review process, and then they award the grants.
now is that, they each have 200,000 or 200,000 total?
There are 3 departments that have $200,000 each.
Which 3 are those?
Juvenile court, social services, and Office of Family Safety.
But that, again, is not written into anything. I mean, that's not policy, that's just, the past mayors have done it, and the current mayor apparently is planning to continue, or he could stop,
Right.
right? So that,
Yep.
that's.
No, that's
current.
true, there's not a policy,
Gotcha,
there's a practice.
Got it.
yeah.
So let me ask you a question. So when we make the budget, this is, and we put so much into a pool to pull these off of, out of the budget?
There is
So,
no pool.
If you're talking about the Nashville Needs Fund, there's
When
a
I was just
pool.
talking about,
If you're talking about all these other things,
Yeah.
no.
okay, so.
There is no money there, and what has
Okay.
happened in the past is during the public hearing
Process, okay.
we have had very effective spokespersons for worthy organizations make very effective pleas. And a big-hearted council member has said, I think that group needs $1 million. Let's give them $1 million.
So they find it from they have to take it from
So we
somewhere
have
else.
to
in
take
the
it
Did on the
somewhere
budget.
else.
Yeah, you gotta take it from somewhere else to add it to a nonprofit.
And in some cases, we just say that, and then we don't
Okay,
have
so-
a department that owns it, and
Right.
it sits there for 3 years and never gets used. So that is not a good process. So we're just trying to back up
Right.
to before that point, so that people who come, I mean, we tend to know who many of these groups are. So if council members can work through our relationships to communicate with them before January. and
That's the next
say-
thing. When is like the cutoff for that, where they can go in and fill out this form
They
and
can,
be in this next 2025 budget?
I mean, in
It
a,
doesn't cut off, because again,
It's
we
not
don't-
there.
We don't have a grant cycle. We don't have a grant fund where we have some, like this is
But we could
nonprofits.
state that in order to be considered for year 2025, this would have to happen, these steps would have to happen.
yeah, I mean, if we can
You know,
communicate,
yeah, communicate.
don't come to us at the public hearing if you didn't come to us in January.
Exactly,
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying, yeah.
Yeah.
So it sounds like that website just needs to have more information, and we need to,
And then we've got to communicate.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing, yeah. Nothing can slip through the cracks, where you'll have organizations that'll show up at the public hearings and say, yeah, oh, yeah, that's still gonna happen, right? I
yeah.
mean, yeah.
So question here, have we ever tracked on a spreadsheet all the organizations that we've done with? So
I
we
could
have
not
that?
find it, but I have it. Talia
okay.
sent it
That
to
we've
me.
actually granted funds,
Yeah.
that we've had a grant contract? Oh,
Yeah.
sure. I mean, we have reports.
So we could send out an email to all of them
Yeah.
with the new process? Just thinking outside the box here,
Yeah.
you know?
And is that, Jane Dozier could create that for us, so,
Who is that, if you don't mind me asking?
She is the division lead of grants and accountability in finance.
so, and I did include her this time, so,
She just,
short notice.
short notice, she was already booked.
Fair enough, but we will set the date for next month's meeting today
one
before we
that was
leave, so,
in-
Yeah, she sat in the corner
Okay,
over
yeah.
here, yeah.
so she can do that.
What's her name?
Jane
Dozier.
Dozier.
I think she gave me a card.
Got it.
Yeah. So I think we should ask Jane to provide that
Yeah,
list.
that would be helpful.
And then also, I mean, just kind of while we're talking, homework for us to do, I think that each of us should look through this hub application, and then also go to the Muni Code 5.04 section, where it spells out what this process is supposed to look like
Yeah,
for metro
What is that?
departments. 5.04,
that's good homework.
yeah, all right, so we got.
Because something else that's, a nonprofit should not be included in the budget without all of their required documentation.
Oh, okay, that's good to know.
And that, I mean, it just, that's the way the code is written.
Good.
Like, even if we were doing a resolution later, it says that we should not present a resolution to council without the nonprofit having all of their required documentation. That sometimes has fallen through the cracks.
During the wish
So they
list
get,
process.
well, they get approved, but we won't, it doesn't fall through the cracks by the time you get to the contract. So what happens is then they get approved the funding, but they don't have all of their documentation, usually the audit. And then we have to wait and wait and wait until they get the audit.
Yeah.
And if they have, I mean, that can be a quick process and it can be a long
I
process.
mean, my thinking on that is they shouldn't even be able to apply till they have the proper documentation. That's That's just my thinking. I mean, if you don't have the documentation, you're never gonna get the money. So why, if it takes them a year, we could, you know, that's
Yeah, somebody else could have been using those.
benefited from it. So I think that needs to be an implemented rule, that until you have the proper documentation. You're
And if
thinking
you think
about that,
about it,
Jason?
that's now.
You act like you was really
Yeah.
thinking about that.
No.
Did you like that, or, I mean, I was saying,
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense.
So the applications,
let the ones that are ready to go, apply for it and get it, to make a difference. You writing all this down in your little
I got it.
book right here?
I got it right here.
I'm typing notes too, so.
I do.
And, you know, and I think I think the ideal is a good thing to shoot for, and then we'll have to kind of do a reality check and see what's really gonna happen.
Yeah.
But I think if we can communicate both with our usual partners and with all the council members farther ahead of time, we have a better chance of just a more effective process during the budget wish list process. I mean, I think that's one of our goals, and then figuring out how the Nashville needs, I think, is a secondary goal that I think
you
comes under
remember-
this committee.
Do you remember when the Nashville Needs Fund gets established?
It, I think, happens when, I mean, it may not happen until
Stadium.
the stadium is
I
complete.
can't remember, so I don't know if it's FY '27.
Yeah,
Maybe. I have to look. I just wondered if you remembered.
I do not remember for sure.
So, okay, so the documentation they have to have, is that a lot? I mean, how many items is that? Is it something,
6 items.
Like-
It's basically like articles of incorporation, board of directors.
Got it. I'll give 'em
You
a
got
look
it.
for,
I've got it.
could we, like,
The biggest one, the hardest hurdle for them to meet is the audit.
Yeah, that's a
And
big
keep
one.
in mind that, as Councilman Allen said, a couple years ago, we actually did a tiered approach on the audit. It used to be anything over $5,000, you needed an audit, any
Period.
grant contract. Now, it's more of a tiered approach. Anything over $50,000, you will still have to have an audit, regardless of the size of the nonprofit. But we tried to do a little bit of a sliding scale with the size of the nonprofit and the size of the grant.
when do they submit your paperwork to you?
They should be submitting it before, so if you
Is-
read the Metro Code, it says it cannot be approved without these documents.
Is there a way for them to put them electronically? Like, if we wanted to say, okay, everything but the audit could be put in electronically to get approval, and then it takes them to another step, and then once you do the audit, then they get to go to the grant step,
So
or whatever you want to call it. I know it's not a grant, but whatever.
that's kind of we're not using proper grant software for them to apply. So they're not uploading anything to that,
But
to the
could
hub
they,
portal.
to make, I mean, that would
Currently,
streamline.
no.
No,
They'd be
but currently,
working
no.
with, they would work with the department. Now, Jane's team is working on some grant software.
Oh, okay.
Okay, that's,
So it's coming.
So it may, okay.
Yeah, it's
I just
coming.
went and done something,
Yeah.
in order to go to the next step, I had to download my dad's death certificate, or wasn't gonna let me go to the
Right.
next step.
But that would be, again, working with the department ahead of time to say, oh, well, this is how much we're thinking of. Okay, well, you're gonna need an audit. All right, well, let me send you everything else, and I'll have my audit done by such and such a date.
and where can we find the Metro Grant Manual?
That would probably
on the
answer my
website.
question. Yeah.
On the finance
I'll send
website?
you.
Where, are there policies in there specifically for grant funding when it comes to paying for audits? Is that in the handbook? Do you know?
We have allowed them to use Metro funds for the audit.
Uh-huh.
So I don't know if it specifically states it.
Are you sending that link to all of us?
I sure can.
Yeah, is you typing that, is that going to here or no? That's
No.
going in there.
No, what
It's
I
there.
do, I write down notes here and then I combine them at the end of the night. I'm crazy.
That's great. And then I'll show you mine and we can,
Yeah,
I'm gonna fill in all the things I missed that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I
which one
think
I wanna do.
what we're saying,
Compare my schedule.
Yeah, but me, you're like me, look.
I mean, one thing that we talked through was council members and nonprofits identify departments that make sense for them to talk to. We make an introduction if they don't have a contact there, and they try to set up a meeting and then go to the hub to fill in an official, we wish we could do this for you. In a perfect world, then when the departments go to the mayor for their budget, for example, Office of Homeless Services, I think is a good example. They can say, we want to provide housing, and Room in the Inn does this piece really well. We're going to have a contract with them. We need this to be in our budget.
Yeah.
And so it's just
that's a
in the
great
mayor's
example.
budget from the get-go. And then when it comes up, we just approve the mayor's budget and we're good to go. That would, that's there, a lot of that happens already, and we don't necessarily need to tweak that. We just need to be aware of it, I think. The second piece then is for those who will come and say, we want to add this to the mayor's budget. We would like for them to have started that conversation beforehand. And, at this place now, because we have the early budget hearing before the budget actually comes out, and I'm presuming Councilmember Porterfield will do that again, then at least in March, we'll hear from them, and if all else fails, we can circle back around at that point and say, if you're gonna wanna do this, at the June public hearing, you need to go to Hub now, and we need to start. So March would be sort of the time to revisit that, I guess. If we're gonna try to do that. So the March public hearing would be another milestone on that.
What would be really cool, it would be to hand any nonprofit just a one-page document that has like a timeline. This is ideal time to submit. This is the ideal time where you would work with the department. This is when the budget process takes place.
Yeah. That would be part of our communication plan.
Exactly.
On the website, we don't even have, I think it is just to be on the website.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying, even if it's flashing up there, so it catches their attention.
So,
This is the deadline.
Yeah.
within Hub, there are frequently articles that you can read before you do it. That would be the logical place for that.
Yeah.
But if there were a physical one-pager as well, then we would have that.
Just something that we can direct people to. It's a question that I get a lot with nonprofits, and if I can just do that instead of spending 5 minutes talking about how it works, that'd be good.
And would Jane be the one to do that, or?
They certainly, the page, the link that I sent you all is part of their, it's a click-through of their homepage.
Let's look at that, okay.
So, yeah, her team is absolutely the best one to answer the questions.
Yeah.
I would still say very few folks looking to apply for funds go that route. They tend to find a council member.
Yeah.
So we at least need the council members to know.
Right, and so I would probably keep it at the application.
Right.
I like the idea of attaching it at the hub site where they're applying, so that's most likely where they're gonna look, take the time to read something.
Gotcha. Okay, so I'm adding another item to our homework, which is to look at the grants manual, and then to look at the hub thing, so we can do that. That's great. So in term of on the hub having that one pager, can we assign that to someone? And if so, is that Jane? Is that IT with information from us, or what's the
Yeah,
best?
we can work on, basically, you wanted to focus on how to apply or the process?
The process?
Yeah.
The ideal, yeah.
And I think part of the problem, part of the complexity is that I don't know that in the past we've necessarily wanted to say, we have an open grant application process.
Right.
So now we're having to define something that really doesn't exist, but it might not exist for a reason.
Yeah,
And that's
right.
not necessarily my decision. I'm
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
because there is not capacity for, you're now putting this on the departments. Are they gonna start getting 50 nonprofits wanting to have a meeting with them because they wanna present their latest and greatest plan that they want funded? That is not what Metro
Right.
needs to be focused on.
Right,
That there is
right.
not capacity to do that. And that's been my hesitation to create this process, that nobody really can manage.
Right,
We just don't want false expectations out there.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because
yeah.
again, as council members, you've been through the budget at least once. There aren't funds sitting there.
Right,
No.
You're gonna be taking them from something else. Now, I really like the idea that we're getting in front of the Nashville Needs Fund.
Right.
I think that changes all of this conversation.
Yeah.
I'm not saying we have to park any of this for the next fiscal budget, but I think that really
What-
changes
yeah, that's an
the
excellent-
conversation.
that's a really valid point. Two things I want to make sure we do before we run out of time and have to do other stuff is,
Forgot
I mean, what if we create this sort of with the Nashville Needs Fund pot in mind, knowing that it's also sort of the place where we could send people, perhaps,
Yeah.
just to ensure that there's a process as opposed to just showing up at the last minute and not having to go through that. Is that
Yeah, we can,
possibly a better solution than just,
I do think it's a better solution when we have funds available to be putting a process around that.
Yeah.
My hesitation has always been putting a process around something that
There's no
there's a
funding.
reason there's no process, because there's really no funds.
yeah,
I'm not saying they don't make their way into the budget, they do. We always get examples of
Yeah.
something made its way into the budget for good reason. I'm not saying, it didn't slip through the cracks, it was intentional, but
But I think every year we have an example we can point to where something made its way into the budget and it has
With good
floundered.
intention,
With good
right.
intentions, and it has floundered because we have not given ourselves good enough guardrails to make sure that we do it right.
I apologize, I was gonna leave at 3:15 I have another meeting.
And you should, that's,
Before I get back to budget and finance tonight, but if anything, just shoot me any more
Okay.
emails. We will talk about the one pager, because I think in this interim, and I need to do a little bit of homework on the
Yeah.
Nashville Needs Fund to know
do
the
that.
timing, so that
Yeah.
we really know. I don't wanna delay all of this and deny folks opportunities if we've got 2 more budgets to go through.
but we could sort of
But I
create
think
it
we're
with
kind
that.
of creating a path for something that would be more effective.
Yeah.
We might have to hobble through it for a little bit.
I think that's
We
fine.
can do that, we can learn on that, that's
Yeah.
good, but thank
Send
you
me
so
any
much for being here on
questions, yeah.
short notice. We are gonna meet in December and we'll pick those dates and send them to you, so.
Sounds good.
We'll send those to you. And I wanna take advantage of having, a department here that has struggled with our good intentions and less than ideal execution. So if y'all wanna just take a minute to sort of talk through either, something that we've done that hasn't worked well, and we know there's several you could choose from, or just your thoughts on how we can do this better, or we should never do this again, or there's a reason y'all are here, so we'd love to hear it.
I have thoughts.
Good thoughts. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
You say stand.
No, come on up here. Yeah, y'all come on in if you want to.
I need company.
Come on in, make yourself at home.
First of all, let me just say, I appreciate the opportunity to communicate with council. I wouldn't say you've done anything wrong. I'm a clinician, so I don't use wrong. But I would say part of the challenges that we face going through this process, we're going through this process now, okay, right now, it's real life, is that all the grants, contracts, they're contracts that we inherited from previous administration now did not have deliverables attached to them. Like if you would ask me, what did you buy for the money you allocated last year? I couldn't answer that question. Okay, I would have to tell you, gee, I don't know. I didn't have enough time for that. And so that's a part of the problem. So now that we're going through the process and having to ask the nonprofits that we're funding to give us, we did a proposal process, we did a training, just like you said. We had 2 in-person training and 1 virtual to make sure that we talk about the process. And one of the questions that was asked is, can we pay for an audit? When we check, it was very interesting, we're listening to that, we're told, no, we can't pay for their audit. Their audit is how they tell us that they are fiscally responsible to handle the money. So we had to say no. So that was a problem. The second portion was some don't have audits. They don't have good financial. When you even ask, you talk about that tier, so you ask for those 12 months of financials, they don't have it to give to us to show that they're fiscally responsible. When they submit their grant proposal for us to review, you have no idea what they're saying they're going to do for the money because it makes no sense when you read it. And so that's a challenge. And so we've gone above and beyond to sit down and say, okay, tell me what you're going to do with the money. Like, talk to us. Or we've looked through the grant and tried to say, well, maybe that's what they meant here, or maybe that's what they're suggesting over here, or can we ascertain that this is what they're going to do? That's been a huge challenge. Whether, I heard some of the conversation we're having, which is true, whether because they've never had to do it before, or they don't have the capacity being a smaller organization to do it, or they've just done the work and been given the money and they never had to send a report to justify the spending, or one organization asked us if they can just send us a random sampling of receipts or documents for what they've done. No, we need actual documentation for the work that you've done. So that's been our challenge. Even now, going through the process, some organizations have no audits. We've done intent awards for a lot of organizations, and I am meeting daily with people to sit and try to help them write their scope of service, because they can't say what they're going to do for the money. And that's a challenge. It's a huge challenge to say, well, can you talk to me about what you're going to do with the money, and then try to interpret what they're saying, to write it out for them to say, okay, I think this is what I hear you say you're going to do for the money. And then a lot of them have no measurements for how they're going to measure that they actually deliver the service to the community. I hear you say you're delivering the service, but can you show me a sign-in sheet? Can you send me a report? Can you do something that says, I spent this $50,000 this way?
Right.
And that's the challenge. We are struggling to receive, and we're public health, so, you know, I'm not looking forward to talking to Phil Williams. So, so we need some accountability. Right. So I would say that's some of our greatest challenges. How do you build capacity with the nonprofits that we consider value partners and we want to see keep doing the work? But how do we do that and balance that against me as the director? This is my boss, Dr. Fonda, who's going to say, so why did you pay that invoice if you did not have a report?
I won't say it like that.
Message. She's more blue, but you know. But she's going to say, well, Dr. Ann, you didn't really have some documentation. So why did we, you know? And so sitting with the nonprofit and saying, I really do need you to show me documents of. Do you have a payroll? Do you have a 1098? Do you have something that says you paid this person for the service? Do you understand that if you said you volunteer for the service, you can't attach a cost on the back end for us to pay for? Volunteerism means service for which there's no financial remuneration. Do you understand if you write something in your proposal that says you're going to do 300 pro bono hours to nonprofit, you can't attach $226,000 to 300 pro bono hours. Do you understand that we can't fund that, the checks and balances? Maybe you meant to say something else, but what you gave me in your proposal is 300 pro bono hours, and that's all I can evaluate. I can't interpret what you meant by that. I have to look at what you're putting in this budget. So that's the real challenges that we're facing at Public Health.
I would say, I'm sorry, another recent challenge that we experienced, something being named in council but did not transfer to the documentation, us saying that they were going to give a certain entity a certain amount of money.
Right.
And then the entity comes to us with the expectation of getting funds.
Right.
And they have to go through an RFP process, which they should not have had to go through. And so it's building bad
because
relationships
we didn't
because you
name
did not. You did not name them. You named one of the two that, you know, was in the discussion, but the other one was not named. And it has become gigantic.
But if we don't name them, then you are required by charter, by law?
To send them through the regular RFP
Yeah,
process.
through the purchasing
Process.
type. I mean, we have to be fair about who
Right.
gets the money. We can't just say you get this for this.
And so
You
when
have to
they,
follow the grants manual.
Like, do you have an example? I'm like one of those type of people, that like to look at example.
are you saying an example of a particular
Yeah,
grant
something,
process?
yes, something that, we can look at, like, where it was
Community
missing.
safety.
Okay.
The funding for the broad
Community Safety Partnership.
partnership,
Yeah.
the funds.
The funds, that was, yeah.
So, and it's again, well-intentioned, response to,
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
if we can take some money from the police budget and put it into community safety, which may be after-school programs or mentorship or violence interruption or all kinds of great things, then, that money can be preventive as opposed to punitive.
Correct.
That was our good intention.
Right.
But I think what we're hearing is, we just said, $500,000 to community safety. Y'all figure it out.
Yeah, well, and it's like we had the money, but, so you named Rafa as one of the recipients.
Direct appropriation.
A direct appropriation. So unless you name somebody as a direct appropriation, then we have to follow the process that they have to go through.
So one we did and one we
One
didn't.
did not.
Yeah, there was several others that didn't,
Several.
but one had, one thought that they were getting
$500,000.
$500,000.
but that never made it to us.
Who was that, if you don't mind?
Community.
Community Foundation.
Community Foundation.
Gotcha.
And so they had a contract for the $500,000. They did. But that contract ended, and now we have to follow the nonprofit grant-making process to award them again. Okay? So when you were talking, there is a nonprofit grant-making
Right.
process out there. And so we have to follow that to award all of the partners, and we have 17. What came to us was 21 that was receiving funding, and we got back 16 applications to refund. So before we did the process, we list just what you said, all the things that we need to have in order for you to get the money. And the deadline was 4:30. What we did, going above and beyond, is let's say we got your application at 2:30 and we're reviewing it, and you're missing 5 things. Well, the grant rule says you should be ineligible for funding. But what we did, because it wasn't the 4:30 deadline, we actually got on the phone and called the entity and said, hey, we're in receipt of your paperwork, but it's 2:30 and you have 2 more hours to get me these 3 things that was not included with your application. Now, the rule says we shouldn't even do that. You should just be ineligible for funding if you did not submit a complete application. But keeping in mind that this was their first time going through this process with us, we got on the phone. There was 4 of us, so we got on the phone, triaging, let's beat the clock before 4:30 to see if we can get all of these documents. And it was challenging to do, but we're committed to keeping the partnership. So we're hustling against the clock. You got to get it back to us by 4:29. If it's 4:30, we can't do anything with this. And so, that's a real challenge. And some of the proposal has no goals, no objective, no scope of service. It's just written in broad terms. We're going to do outreach. Well, to how many people?
Right.
What type of outreach? So those are the challenges that we're dealing, real life challenges that we're dealing now. Even this week and next, I'm meeting with people to try to help them write their scope to see if we can get them money.
And yet we realize that they do good work in the community.
Yes,
That's what I was gonna ask you. I mean, you
Yeah.
realize, okay, so we're talking about people that can do good work in the community, but just do not have
The infrastructure.
the
to support.
people or the support, or have ever done anything like this
Absolutely.
to meet the guidelines for Metro government.
Yes,
Correct.
yes.
That is
Correct.
And that's where we talked about the fiscal agent
Yeah.
of, are there
Yeah.
umbrella organizations that can do that piece, or that
And
can
he-
coach them through that?
I'm sorry. And even though that you name somebody as a direct appropriation, we still have to have a contract
Yes.
with them. So that sometimes takes a little time to get in place. So,
Gotcha.
even though our contract starts July 1, by the time we get all of our I's crossed and T's crossed and I's dotted, and get it in
December.
place. It's December. You know, and we can't pay their invoice for the work done until
There's a
we have the executed contract.
So where do y'all think the number one breakdown is? Let me be open. I mean, this is a working group.
I know, we-
You know what I'm saying?
So,
The number one.
You could say 3.
Yeah, okay, well, we were hoping it wasn't gonna be 3, but.
So I hear you saying fiscal agent, so
Yeah.
putting on my clinical language in now. If you select a clinical fiscal agent, you have to ensure that that fiscal agent has the capacity to support the smaller nonprofits that you're sending their way for funding.
Okay, so let's just say that's Department of Health. I mean, that's what we're going to use, so I'm following the process with you.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and let's say there's 10 groups getting 50,000. Is that what you're saying? You know, okay, so we're on the right track
You're on the right
then?
track.
Okay.
I'm gonna go with over on the other side. You
Okay.
select a nonprofit that is the fiscal agent, the holder of the group that you want to fund. You have to ensure that this nonprofit that you are gonna give the direct appropriation to has the capacity to engage the smaller nonprofit and to train them up so that they're able to get the money.
So in theory, what that agent does then is they have the audit thing, they help the other organizations write a good scope of work and
Yes.
good deliverables and good metrics
Yes.
and all that kind of thing.
Yes.
So they take on that responsibility.
Like the United Way helping
Yes.
10 little ones.
Yes.
Exactly.
Exactly.
So if you're going to fund an organization and their role is to do consultation with smaller nonprofit, I hope you're picking up what I'm putting down, to do work with smaller nonprofit, that larger entity has the capacity or has things aligned so that you, John and Bob, 501c3, will get what you need from me, the entity that you've contracted with, to get you ready to apply for and receive funds.
Right.
If that's not in place, then you have to ask the question, what are you paying for the larger nonprofit?
Exactly.
But that was my next question. How much does the larger nonprofit, the agent, get to keep? Let's say a company, 501(c)(3), say it gets 50,000, and it's going through United Way. How much does the United Way get to keep of that 50,000?
Well, it depends on what their fees are. For nonprofit, it range between 10 up to 19%. So they may get 10 or 19% of that $50,000.
Well, nonprofits are supposed to be nonprofits.
Gotcha.
So you have to, so that's the other thing that council has to decide is what's the indirect costs that you are going to cap
Right.
for nonprofits when you give them the money. You can make that decision that the indirect costs cannot exceed 10% or 11% or whatever that is. You have to set that cap. Otherwise, they go with their cap, which is up to 19, could be almost to 21%. The federal cap is 10%, just in case you want something to look at.
What's the federal?
The federal is between 10 and 15%, no more than 15. That's the federal cap.
Gotcha.
And you have to have robust
I mean,
justification
but when you think
for
about it, though, let's
15%.
just say it's a person $50,000, and you're taking them, if it's 21%, you're taking them down to 40. I mean,
And you do the work for
and
that.
you do the work for that. I mean, I don't know.
Right.
I don't know
So
about the
these are
process.
things that you dedicated civil servants are tasked with ensuring that are in place. But I would tell you that those are our challenges. We are working through them. And even when you do a direct appropriation, keep in mind that the person you say for us to give the money to still have to give us a scope of service that's saying what they're going to do for the money.
Gotcha.
If they don't give us that, we can't issue a contract to them. It will never go through contracting. So they have to say for, let's use RAFA for example, just because I just got finished with theirs after months, finally got something that went through contracting. they have to be able to say what they're going to do for that $159,000. It's not just we're going to work with the Juvenile Justice Department. That is beautiful. What are you going to do?
So can
in the
they
work
say,
that you're doing?
we'll take 20 kids through?
There you go. That's what it needs to say.
Exactly.
It needs to say,
Exactly.
it needs to be detailed. The scope of work is to engage
20 youth in the
20
North
youth
Nashville area at this zip code area to do
the
A, B, and
diversionary
C.
project to keep them from being involved with the juvenile justice system. And then you're going to have to tell us, how are you going to measure that? How are you going to demonstrate to us that 24 kids
Actually
actually
came
came
through.
through? Do you have a sign-in sheet? Do you have, what will we get to show us that you engage 24 unduplicated kids? Not just one person signed 24 times, but you have 24. And that's what a scope of service looks like. It has to spell out what you're giving back to Metro, all of us, because we're Metro, for the money that you've been given. And that's a challenge that we've had. We've had people who can't demonstrate that when they send us something. They can't. And I am spending a lot of time trying to write that for them so they can get a contract.
And we appreciate that.
But that's what they're paying United Way to.
But it's not
Exactly.
United Way, but yes.
I'm just saying,
Yeah,
yeah.
United, that's what they're paying the other entity. No,
you're
that's what
doing it.
you're paying the other
Yeah,
entity
yeah, that's what-
for.
yeah, okay.
But we're doing it.
Yeah.
That's what I want you to think about.
Ooh, this is very helpful information. We appreciate it. So, we need to wrap up and set up time for our next meeting,
appreciate
but
you all.
this is very helpful to get some
Yes,
very
thank you for
specific
letting us-
example. So we appreciate y'all being here. And, again, I think that is a great example of, a really impassioned plea that came up during the budget process, and we thought, oh, yes, this is more fun than money and judgments and losses. Let's spend it to save our youth, which is good. But we are, as you can hear, just trying to think through what preparation can we do ahead of time so that when we get to that point, we at least know what questions to ask those groups or to prepare them to be ready to provide to y'all. And how can we document that and communicate it so that we don't just spend a whole lot of time in catch-up, which it sounds like.
And on the front end, how do you get that information before you do the direct appropriation? Because if they met those criteria before direct appropriation, it would be helpful when it's time for contracting.
Gotcha.
Because we would already know that they have met the criteria that's in
Yeah.
the nonprofit grant manual. They've already met those criteria
Right.
before you do a direct appropriation, and now on the back end,
Yeah.
we're trying to help them.
I don't know if y'all have ever sat in on the council wish list process, but typically what happens, the way the budget is working these days is in March, we have a public comment period now where we say, based on what you learned in last year's budget, tell us what you wish we would do differently in this year's budget. And it's, it's often Metro employees who are just asking for decent wages, and it's usually justice groups that are, asking for youth programs and all good things that we wish we had enough money for. And so now that they come in March, then that at least theoretically gives us some time to sort of work through, just some exchange of information to say, if you're going to come back to us in June and expect us to add money to amend the mayor's budget, here's what we're going to need before we
Here you go.
do that.
That's it. Give that one pager with, these are the things you need to have in
Yeah.
place in order for.
And
us
that's
to do
probably
that.
more realistic than asking them to go to you in
Correct.
January and say,
Correct.
we want to be in your budget.
Correct.
Take it to the mayor and tell him you want money for us, because I know it sounded idealistic, but this feels less neat but more realistic. So I thank y'all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Oh, I didn't.
Not, if y'all would just email me y'all's information.
Sure.
So I have it.
Yes, 'cause
Thank you, thank you.
I know I'm going to misspell everybody's name. So
We'll do that.
if you don't want to laugh at my spelling, please give me a card.
We'll do that.
That'd be great. And then we hopefully can meet one more time in December. I'll bring cookies. It's Christmas season. December 4th after 1, December 5th between 2:30 and 4, December 9th from noon to 5, or December 11th 2 to 5.
Yeah,
I
send me
think
your
I put,
information, I probably do.
I didn't put it on the minutes, I just have it here.
4th, 5th, and 11th.
4th, 5th, 9th, and 11th. Thank y'all so very much.
Thank you so much for having us and for listening.
Thank y'all.
Appreciate it.
All right, so just start eliminating things. December 4 after 1.
I've got stuff the 4th and the 5th.
Okay, so let's move to December 9th, noon to 5.
I'm good either day.
I think I can do that, yeah.
Okay, let's do December 9th, we don't want to meet at noon. What is the 9th? Is that,
It's a
Monday.
Monday.
it's a Monday? We're going to be here? No, we won't be here for committee meetings anyway.
Yep,
Okay. What time of day? Is late in the day better, just in terms of,
that's
It
fine.
don't matter to me.
Yeah, I mean,
Me either, actually.
I'm wide open on that day, so
Okay, let me
you
check.
tell me.
let's do it at 1.
That'd be great.
Okay. So next meeting is, all right, and Councilmember Gregg better be, so Dina.
He said, I talked to him, he said he'd be at the next one.
Okay. I think he's,
Is that the only council meeting we have in December, is the first week?
oh, no.
No, we got two.
We always-
16th, I think, is the second one.
Okay.
Or 17th.
Yeah.
17th.
Okay, so our next meeting
Okay.
will be December 9th at 1. I think this has been really good.
Heck yeah, it
Yeah.
has been.
So I think what we've said we're gonna do is maybe create on the hub sort of the beginnings of the Nashville needs process.
Yep.
Right.
And then if it turns out that's something we can point these people to in March and say, if you're gonna try to do this,
Yeah,
we need the paperwork that you would have to apply for the National Needs Fund, so do that.
yeah.
Let's, I think that solves
Yeah.
the problem that Mary Jo has identified.
It would be really nice in a couple, and I don't think it's gonna happen this year, but in a couple of budget cycles that we get to the point to where we don't have any surprises, like, and I hate to pick them out, but like the varsity spending plan,
Yeah, I
right?
mean, that's the example.
I
Yeah,
mean,
that's
I'd
perfect.
never heard of them until
neither.
the week before the budget.
Right.
Yeah.
And then they got $1 million.
Right.
I know.
Yeah.
And how did they get a million? I mean,
They had some really eloquent
They
kids.
did.
They brought a dang army,
They
you know?
did, who was very good.
Yeah.
All right, so are we
If
know
If
when
we
we
had known
meet?
about them in
I'm gonna-
March, that would have been a different,
I'm gonna stop the
different
recording.
conversation.
Yeah.
All right, we are adjourned.
We're good.